Okay, there we go. Hello, Jim and Noah.
Hey, Mo.
Hi there.
I'm so glad that you both could join me today. And for others that are joining, people are starting to stream in. Welcome to Know Better, Do Better Hour. In case you're wondering if you're in the right place, that's what we're going to be talking about, knowing better and doing better. And please do introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to have the chat open the whole time. It's a really good way for us to get your inputs and your questions. I have the Q&A open as well. So if you have a question that you want to ask, it's kind of like a more, not so chatty, but like more of a bigger question that you want either Noah or Jim or I to address, put it there too, but we can also talk in the chat. And I love that you're introducing yourselves. I love seeing some of the folks that have been with us before for Know Better, and also some members of my team. Thank you for joining, May Ratz, and I loved seeing you there, Trisha, and others. So really happy that you guys could make it. Hi, Luann. Hi, Meredith. Really awesome that you're here. And I couldn't be happier to host these two fine men today. So this is the last of our 4-part series for now. And for those of you that either joined or didn't join, I spoke with Susan Hyatt, who's my mastermind coach. She's a white woman who is on fire about white women doing white woman work. And that was a super fun conversation. The recording's on my website at mocarrick.com if you want to watch it. With Tanya Hood Hill, who's what is her title? She is VP of Talent and Culture at TechSoft 3D, lives in Oakland, identifies as an African-American woman. And we talked a lot about political correctness and how to not be locked into that. And then last week, I spoke with Cherie Buckner Webb, who's a colleague of all of ours. Cherie is the first and only female Black senator from Idaho, where she says there are Black people, just not very many of us. And we had a wonderful conversation about the common good and what's our role in making the world better. And Cherie is retiring from the Senate in a couple of months, and is just like my model of a public servant. So these conversations have been wonderful, and I've been so honored. And today we have you two white guys finishing it off. And I wanted to have you both come because of how important it is, I think, to bring white men and white masculinity into the conversation. And you two are two of my most respected and esteemed colleagues in this space. And I want to let you introduce yourselves, but first I will, in full transparency, own the fact that Jim Morris is also my husband. So if you don't know that already, then now you know. This is my man on there who just went Black. I don't know why. He's announcing that he's leaving me now by turning off his video. But great to have you here, Jim. So without me like watering down your bios, people can find that on LinkedIn. But how might you like to introduce yourselves? Noah, you want to go first?
Awesome, certainly. Yeah, so in addition to being a colleague of Mo and Jim's, I have been on my diversity, equity, inclusion journey, if you will, since I was a teenager. I started when I began attending a largely Black high school, and in my early teens also began listening to hip hop music. And that surface level introduction to other cultures and other viewpoints then led to personal relationships, which accelerated my journey and challenged me really a lot, and still does in good ways to further develop. Those skills I try to harness and now and bring into our corporate arena. Jim and I work largely with Fortune 500, 100 companies, and I work with other white men and really leaders that we call insiders. Jim will probably talk more about that, helping us understand from a place of support challenge that we have both personal benefit from inclusion and we have responsibility when it comes for leading for equity.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah. I know you're in the work in your personal life and in your professional life, and just always so honored to have your voice, at the table with me. Jim, how about you?
Let's see. So it says what I am. I don't need to say who I am and stuff. But the thing I guess I'd say about me around this work is, to begin with, I kind of feel like I sit at the feet of people like Noah, who've been doing this work most of their career. And my background really has been in leadership and character, and certainly character and the moral imperative of inclusion, are connected. But so my work in the inclusion world really is tied to kind of looking at leadership and how that leaders manifest not only what's best for their organizations, but what's best for everyone else on the planet. And I didn't actually even know around this topic. I didn't even really get it at all until I was in my late 30s or early 40s. Even I grew up in a family where there was a lot of culture, and we studied all kinds of cultures. I knew about all kinds of different cultures. I knew about people, all sorts of West African and East African and South African cultures. I knew about a lot of cultures about Europe. I traveled to Europe and was in fact born there. I had no idea until in my late 30s that there was a white male culture, and that we were actually a group even, and that we identified as white men. It was just something I had never thought of. And actually, I think that's a pretty normal story for a lot of, men of my generation. So yeah, I'll start with that.
Yeah, I'm not even sure your generation, right? In terms of like how we talk about identity. And we talked a lot about how we tend to identify outsider identity more than we do insider identity in terms of who's in the dominant culture. So I just got to ask you guys, this is my first question that I'm super curious about, because it's come up in all of the Know Better, Do Betters, and it's something I've been seeing lately, right? So the whole world's on fire about race right now. Okay. You can't turn around. I can't have anybody over for dinner. Like, we are talking about race all the time. And I'm so glad because the world is potentially breaking open in some ways that are transforming all of us. And in social media, especially, but also in my worlds, like as I intersect with clients, I'm noticing men missing. They aren't jumping in, white men. I see that at the rallies, and I see my young sons who are in their late 20s, pretty active and on fire. But in terms of like leaders, Noah, your age and higher, like Jim, so you in our generation, the white men are either silent or they're not showing up in ways that I'm seeing white women show up, which is kind of like, hell yeah. And also like, I don't know what I don't know. And oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. But what's happening with white guys right now? I want you to speak for all of them. No, I don't want you to speak for all of them. I know you can't do that, but like, what's your take on the communities of white men that you're circling with? Where are they at right now? Where are you all at?
I think a couple things are going on with that. I think people are stressed the hell out with COVID. And I think those of us that have been privileged to really live individual lives, and I'm speaking for myself now as Noah and as a white guy. So having the privilege, I was just speaking on a panel an hour ago with all other Black panelists, actually, including the cousin of Eric Garner. And it was interesting kind of comparing their experiences around thinking about this and around my experience of being an individual, even when I was listening to hip hop and all the stuff I told that was a little different than Jim's generation. And so I think that individual notion that you can make your own destiny, that you can live by the American credo of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is very challenged, from mask wearing to other items that I think white men are for the first time feeling some en route, some restrictions of mobility, credibility, and accessibility that we have become accustomed to it, frankly, after generations. So that's already there, being challenged. And then there's we are, I would say, as a group, somewhat late to this class. Not that we are all totally at fault for that when we're looking at systems, but we're somewhat late to this class. And so, the skill of coming in sometimes with humility and curiosity and inquiry isn't always what has been experienced, isn't always the way white men, in my experience, have been socialized to approach this conversation. So I think those things are coming up a little bit in play right now. I don't know. What do you think, Jim? What would you add to that? Or subtract?
I think men are scared shitless about some of this. White men are scared shitless, frankly, to use that expression. Both of us have worked with enough different senior executives that when they close the doors, and this was before what we're currently going through around race, but in Me Too, men would close the door with us and say, I'm scared. I'm really nervous about my executive team and what might come out, what we might find out. And that was around, not just around gender, but that was around gender. I actually think most white men have a little higher level of comfort around gender than they do around race, because we're just not, it's a topic we don't want to be called a racist, and we don't want to reveal we don't understand what's going on. Right. To some degree. So instead of actually asking questions and being curious, or coming from a stance of humility and saying, I'm trying to learn this, we just hope we don't get found out, right? We're just walking on eggshells trying to make sure we get by. before something happens, and that somehow we will indirectly learn about it. And I'm sure you're going to talk about this soon, Mo. But one of the issues, of course, is that the other thing that we do in our efforts to try and catch up is we over-rely on men and women of color, particularly black men and women at this time right now, to say, can you tell me about this so I can get it? And, of course, the people that they're asking are the same ones everybody asks, and they're exhausted.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I love both I love what you're both saying, and it's helpful, I think, to hear, for me as a white woman, I don't have visibility necessarily into what's going on in the minds of white men as they bear witness, as we all are to what's happening. And so let me ask this too, like for you both personally, right? So you're both men who work in the business sector, you're working with a lot of white guys like you, and in your homes. I know these conversations are happening in your homes because I live with one of you, right? But like, how are you doing? Like, I've asked all my panelists this on this Know Better, Do Better. How are you doing? What are you feeling right now as in your own journey at this point in time?
I'm more hopeful about the first question. I'm more challenged by the second question. As you and Jim know, I'm married to a black woman, and I'm a stepfather of a black daughter. And one thing that I've shared, I think that the angle of that I want to share today, I've been spending a lot of time thinking and feeling lately, is just how much now I'm aware of spaces when I walk in as a white man and am perceived as a individual white man rather than a white man in a interracial relationship, and quite honestly, a white man that publicly stands for Black Lives Matters and wears T-shirts that say that kind of stuff and whatnot around town. And so when I walk into a space, I get that treatment I used to get, which is that almost like that water cooler treatment, which is we can talk about anything, say anything, things aren't going to be acknowledged. I even have my spidey senses up now after a few years of marriage, and I'm like, wow, would I feel comfortable bringing Isha and Adrian in here? I mean, I used to not, like, I really and there's a lot of situations I have to say now, maybe I'm paranoid in some of them, but there's quite a lot I'm finding white spaces that I could lose my activist or professional identity in and just kind of escape and drink beer or whatever. And there's quite a lot of spaces now where I'm like, no, I couldn't bring my wife in here at this time, and I don't know if I should still be going in here. So there's much more of a disequilibrium coming up for me personally around this right now, and some real turmoil journey.
Yeah. I'd say the same thing for me, Mo. Well, in terms of I feel some disequilibrium, and I think I'm actually kind of, well, this is probably going to give you license to say what's going on, but I feel like I'm a mess. A colleague of ours, Ethan, he said, I feel like when I go out in the COVID world, my nervous system is just taking a beating. I'm just, and I think it has more of an impact on me than I'm aware of. I think as a man, I was acculturated to not really connect with what's happening in my body. So I think I kind of stiff up or limp my way all the way through it, or try to, which of course that doesn't really work. And I'm kind of a mess on some elements about what's happening, and particularly what's happening to black people in police violence. I'm just like, we've got relatives that are in law enforcement, and they're good men, they're doing good work, and yet there's also this element about what's happening that's just overwhelmingly messed up, and there's a pernicious systemic issue at play that we've got to figure out a way to address. And I actually feel just as helpless as probably a lot of people about how to do it. I've got the language to talk about it, but I'm working on the tools to go do something about it. And to, And so I'm in grief about it. I'm deeply concerned. I watch the news, and I watch the news cycle almost too much. And I can see how many stories are playing out in the news cycle around stuff around Black Lives Matter and around racial equity and justice. And it feels like it's going down, and it makes me nervous, so there's a great opportunity here. I hope we seize it.
Yeah.
I love what you're both saying, like two quotes for me that you just said that I want to underline a little bit, because I think they're really powerful. I'm in a lot of disequilibrium, and I'm a mess, right now. And like both of you, to hear you guys say that it touches me. Like I want you to know that it touches me, because I'm not seeing that in my regular interactions with guys like you. And it gives me like a tremendous amount of hope partly because I know that racism will be dismantled by white people, and mostly white men like you. You know, which really is hard for me to own and admit, because I think of myself as powerful as you. You know, like that's my self-identity. You know, like I got a can of whoop ass in me, and in my mind, I'm like, you know, CEO of all the companies. But the reality is I'm not. And so I don't have access to the same systems and the same conversations that the majority of white men do. So like hearing you both describe kind of disequilibrium and being kind of a mess and not necessarily knowing what to do is really like validating for me. It connects to like some of what I feel also, but it also helps me feel closer to you as like being in this work together, you know, and not knowing necessarily the way out. And I think often of what Michael Kimmel says, who is an ally of ours, you know, and who wrote Angry White Men, for those of you that may not be familiar with his work. Michael Kimmel talks about how until white men can see a benefit to themselves of being inclusive partners in creating cultures of belonging, then nothing will change. And so like, I feel such almost like desperation about, you know, men seeing something in it for themselves. And so, and remind me if I forget, but I want to come back to an observation I have of being in the mess. If I forget, it has to do with white women. But first, let me ask you this. What do you think is the benefit to men, to white men in particular, around creating cultures of belonging, being anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic? You know, I get why, and we've talked in Know Better, Do Better, why the world has to change to benefit outsiders. But what's going to happen? What's the self-interest for white guys like you to change the world in this way?
For me, one of them is you're looking at it on screen. For me, it's intergenerational development. So the idea that, you know, Jim's generation is passing the baton to me, I'm passing the baton on to those coming behind me, is really keen on kind of my psychology of the world and how I go about leadership development. And in this time, you know, I can share this, you know, Jim and I work together closely, like you know, me being aware of my emotional frustration at systemic injustice, and being aware sometimes when I see an image of Donald Trump and then I see images of white men in control all over, then I come to my own company and we have white men there, and it can be very easy, especially when you're living in a mixed family and you are passionate about it, to then put that group identity back on every white man. And that's different than saying every white man has responsibility, which we do. But then putting that energy back on, you know, Jim, if I can share this, Jim and I had a kind of a scruffle on the phone a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Man, are you angry at older white guys?" And I was like, "Hell effing no, I'm not angry at older white guys." And then I thought, oh man, maybe I'm angry at older white guys. So what's in it for me, and that energy then comes back right into our marriages, into our parenting. It comes back into, am I going to drink beer tonight or go biking tonight? Am I going to talk positive to myself tonight, or am I going to shame talk myself tonight? So that reverberates and comes out the next day too when we interact with others. And if we're looking at professional alignment with our personal practice, then what's in it is more liberation and more freedom to bring those emotions in, to slow down, as Jim and others say. And then also, and for, you know, for the natural tides of change to come in. So for Jim letting me come in and learning how to bring my voice in, and then me turning around and help allowing the next outsider, next generation to come in and do it. And I think that's a critical part to helping the longevity and the long-term picture.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that. What would you add, Jim, around self-interest?
Oh gosh, it's, you know, this is so complicated. Like, you and I live in Bend, Oregon, where there actually is a fair amount of diversity, but it's not stuff that we know. They're not in terms of, it's not a dynamic that we can easily become aware of because of just the way that Black and brown people in this community live amongst us in many cases. But, you know, because of our travel schedule and our work and the different things that we're involved in, we frequently don't interface with a lot of Black and brown people, even in Bend, Oregon, right? And, you know, one person said, there's no problem with race in Bend, Oregon. And I heard a Black person say, yeah, that's because there's no race in Black Oregon. You know, there's no diversity in Bend. But you know, there is diversity here, and I think that we've got to just continue to look at ways to, you know, people say, well, I don't have anybody here that I know. I don't have any friends. It's like, well, go make friends. You know, go create relationships. Like Mo, you've done a great job, I've noticed, just developing professional and personal friendships with all sorts of people, a wide diversity of people. So they're there, but you're really good at bridging the gap. I actually think I'm less good at it, and I think something that a lot of people struggle with is particularly white people, is how to do that. You know, and I think we have to go find a way to do that, not because it's good for everybody else, but because it's good for us. You know, my life is richer and fuller because of the friends I have that are not like me. You know, I love my white male friends, the ones that are really close, the ones that are willing to open up and share with me their heart. And there aren't that many of them, actually, I have to say. But I also love my friends who are different than me, who are black and brown, who are women, who are indigenous, who I've gotten to know through my work and also personally. And I want to just say, so another thing that to me is really, it touched me really, really deeply is I was really bothered by, of course, like as we all were, about the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Jones, and even the Amy Cooper kind of news cycle stuff. I was bothered by it just psychically, like all of us was, and that was really different for me than when Noah called me, having tried to explain to his daughter watching George Floyd. It got really personal then. It was like, this is a man I love. And you know, people of color, black people, they have to talk about that all the time. I had one friend, and it was like a spear through the heart. I have one friend who's actually experiencing this personally, in a way that I'm not. And you know, and that was a pretty good motivator to try and do something about it. Sorry, I got verklempt.
No, I want to riff off the love that Jim is sharing right now. I mean, Black lives matter when we and they matter to us, and they personally matter to us, or women's lives, or any other outside group. But let's say Black lives matter at a time in history when we have those personal relationships, right? And that is a critical piece. And I agree with Jim, that relational aspect of how it enhances our own lives is.
Right.
I want to stay married to my partner. I want to be a good dad. I want to have lifelong friends. I want to have stories about me told when I pass on. And that doesn't happen without relation. And it's not also the model of white malehood and coming of age and kind of rites of passage that I was given. My parents, yes, but larger than that, it was sex, drugs, and rebellion. And I would say unorchestrated rebellion at that.
Right.
Well, thank you both for sharing that. And Jim, you know, your words of empathy and connection, you know, obviously really touched me, and I'm sure they touched the people that are on with us. And I think I just want to like call out, because I think what just happened, like that dynamic, watching you two feel each other and like feel with each other, father to father, coworker, boss to employee, you know, around your feelings about this. Like for me, that you just modeled is why white men need to be part of this work, because, you know, you're two white guys talking to each other with me, a white woman, about race and connecting on an emotional level in a way that, you know, heals us and connects us with that vulnerability. And I think one of the things that I know you both have talked about and that you've seen me talk about is the very narrow band that many men are, white men in particular, are enculturated to be in emotionally. And that narrow band keeps them from sometimes forming those kinds of emotional, connected, vulnerable relationships that we know are important to human survival.
Right.
So like, I think you just modeled what's available to white men if they are willing and able and have the support to be in this work around emotional connection, even if they're not just connecting with Black people, they're connecting with each other in ways that are emotionally rich, and that's going to save them, right? It's going to, emotionally and mental health wise.
Absolutely. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I want to just mention again to the folks that are on to put questions, reactions, feelings, thoughts, and comments into the chat. It helps us to think about what we want to talk about, even though we have some structured questions. But So please do. And I think on this webinar, it's possible that you all won't be able to see each other's chat comments, but I will read them out to you as they come up, if they're relevant. And so you can ask a specific question or just comment, I love what Noah said or whatever. That's really helpful for us. So I think that, yeah, there is a lot in it for insiders, and in this case for white men, to do this work of creating cultures of belonging and of connection, in so many ways. And one of the things I do appreciate about like insider culture, the way we all talk about it in the work we do, is that, and you guys just kind of model this too, it's like the willingness to make mistakes. I think there's something about white male culture that sometimes to me feels more tolerant of mistakes than white female culture. That's what I was thinking about, because I've seen in the other Know Better, Do Better hours, we've talked a lot about with white women. With Susan, she was like, white women are really afraid of doing it wrong, and so they act like empty vessels is the language I used, where white women will, even in her experience, senior CEO white women who are saying all of a sudden now in the face of race, I know nothing, so I'm an empty vessel, fill me up, Black person, and then I had Twania and Cherie say, hello, I'm tired, I'm not your bluegill. That's what Cherie called it. I'm not your bluegill. Right? Don't use me for your information, to get information that you need. You find out, yourself. And I think a lot of white women come into this work right now as they begin to maybe be more woke than they have been, very afraid of doing it wrong. So afraid of doing it wrong, in fact, that they don't do anything. And so that's something that I wanted to just put in the room. And we just got a super good question that I want to have you guys comment on before we leave it. What have Jim and Noah changed their minds about lately in terms of things they used to be? I'm going to read you all these questions. These are some good questions. So one is from Luann. Thoughts on how to raise let's start with this one. From Luann. Thoughts on how to raise my white boys into white men like you?
I'm still growing.
Yeah, right. I'll tell you when I grow
up. I just
up.
want to say these two are times, Luann. So, they're not all good, but.
Thoughts on it? Well, let me share that my mom is the first. I like what Jim said earlier, by the way, that racism is seen as an insult. And I think that's a problem. The scholar, the Black scholar writer Ibram X. Kendi writes a lot about racism being viewed as a pejorative, and that inhibits a lot of white people from progressing on this journey. So I say on purpose that my mom was the first person to intervene in my racism. So mothers and fathers and parents, period, whatever gender or non-gender, are instrumental in this. And my mom did so when I had said a racist name for a Black person akin to the N-word that I had learned from a Tintin book I was reading. Which, if we, it's amazing how much stuff you've taken as a child around racism and white supremacy, if you will, from Tintin to Bugs Bunny cartoons and their depictions of Asians and others. It's Native Americans. It's all there.
Yeah.
That filter isn't there, even with very good parents, progressive parents, if you will, that I had. They can't catch every moment. Nonetheless, my mom heard me using this term and teaching it to my sister in a little jingle that I had written, a little song. And so she said, and she didn't, to this day, I remember the intervention. She didn't, although I didn't know the word intervention then, she didn't shame me, but she's like, yeah, we don't use that word in this house. And when your mom was younger, she walked with Dr. King. My mom did do that. And I'm not saying that to elevate her, although I will elevate my mom. I'm saying that to highlight, well-behaved women seldom make history. So my mom was the one that, kind of intervened on that, and then she didn't encourage me, she made me read a book with her about Dr. King. So it wasn't just, oh, you said the wrong thing, you've embarrassed the family, check your ego. It was, no, we don't use that language, there's a bigger story behind it, and I'm going to take the time, slow down, and go that journey with you. My first entry into anti-racism or into addressing my own racism was of love and challenge. I think that's huge. And then the second piece behind it is, I sometimes hear white parents say, I don't really want to hurt the innocence of my child. And as a mom, I grew up with kind of hippie parents. I got to run around naked in the backyard till I was 5. Probably shouldn't say that on live, but I mean, I would, they were pretty out there, but and I got to have a pretty innocent child, if you will. But then I look now at being the father of a black daughter and what Jim said, and I'm realizing one of the things I recognize right now is that not all children do get to have innocence all the time in this system. And so I might be actually enabling my child's progression by having those difficult conversations with love.
Beautiful.
That was great. I don't have much to add to that, Mo, and except, well, maybe a couple of things. One, lightly, is I'll tell you, my parents did. I think they did everything they knew how to do that was good. I grew up upper middle class in Northern Virginia. My dad worked at the Smithsonian. We housed people who were part of different peace marches in Washington and stuff. So we did all that stuff. But I also was, I grew up with a black community 2.5 miles from me that was actually the slave quarters from Mount Vernon. I didn't actually know that until I was 45 years old. My parents didn't uncover that history because they were busy with their own careers and everything else. So I got the alternative version of American history that all of us around how that stuff works, and the story around redlining and just everything about the sublimation of the communities of color across the country, and the consistent and systematic repression of people in those ways. So I didn't, my parents did, and they did everything right. The one thing I would also really credit them with, which is also something, Mo, I think we definitely imbued into our children, and this is an expression that we use in our work, is, all of our kids know they have privilege. They know it. They all get it. And our boys and our daughters know that, they're expected to use it's not like a request. It's an expectation. It's probably the biggest expectation we put on them, which is to use their privilege honorably. And so I'm not saying we kind of beat them up with that, but I think they all know that you can do whatever you want with your life, but be aware of the power disadvantage and the opportunity disadvantage that sometimes we have that others don't have, and to use their white skin for the benefit of others.
Yeah, I love that. And at the same time, I would add that I think that can be a burden. At least I've seen my boys impacted that around not making them, and I don't think I did make them, but I think my boys in particular have had to struggle with, what does it mean to use my privilege with grace? Because we can't get rid of it, right? Our privilege just exists. Right. We're born with it around race. And I would also add to Loanne's question, I want to get to these other questions, that I think something I see you both do with your children, and that I certainly have worked really hard to do with my children, including my 2 boys and my daughter, is to create a way for them to talk about feelings.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And to allow their feelings to be present around issues of difference. Like I can remember, I have visceral memories of sitting with my kids and watching some powerful films. What was that film about? The woman who got the brain injury, The Fighter, with Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah,
and Hilary Swank.
$1 Million Dollar Baby.
Baby.
Yeah.
And then we watched, and I remember like the pain and watching my kids cry. We watched the Rabbit-Proof Fence about Australia, and the trying to breed whiteness out of Aboriginal. I remember my children, my boys who were young adolescents, just crying, like really crying, and me holding and being present with them, not necessarily holding or like, keeping them from their tears, but being like, it is painful, isn't it? It's hard to watch what people do to other people. And let's talk about this and what you're feeling about it. And I think I can claim victory in some ways, as can you both, that our children are capable of talking about a wider spectrum of emotion than I was maybe even trained, although I had some good teachers in my parents because of their alcoholism and recovery, right? But I think that's a really important part to Loanne's question, right? Is helping our children have ways to use their words to describe their feelings, because that's how we heal, and that's how we learn what we're capable of,
Yes.
So
that reminds me of that classic Mr. Rogers episode, where in the height of the civil rights struggle, he had an episode where kids were he recognized kids were probably striving for language around what they were seeing on their TVs and the civil rights marching. So he did an episode where he had a black police officer. So he had a black man in authority come and sit, and then in an era of segregation, take his shoes and socks off and put his feet in the tub with him. And then they talked about how you treat your friends, and when your friends come over, you make them comfortable, and so again, putting that emotional fabric and language in. So I love that you brought that in, Mo.
Well, and that
That's a great. I forgot about that story. That's great. Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, and the care that shows around like how we care for each other, how we care for each other. So I'm gonna come back to a couple more questions because these are like super good questions. So Trisha asks this question: I am a woman of color and my brother is white. He feels that because of color that he doesn't have any work to do around race, although he does. How can I help him in this area? This is the thing I hear all the time. Like white women often say, like, I dated a black man, or I have a black child, but so that means I get it. It's kind of like the story.
When COVID's over, he could have dinner with us. My wife will. I've shared these before. I have a BA in Black feminist thought. I got to study with bell hooks, so there's some of my woke credentials. And my wife will like to tell me that those credentials don't mean anything when I'm having dinner and married to a black woman that lives life as a black woman. So, the work is to be done. But no, I think helping your brother, your wife. I'm sorry, is this the brother or the
brother?
wife?
Yeah, sure,
Brother. I think helping the brother understand too the facts of how he's both an individual and a group member. He probably has made individual choices very different than, for instance, Donald Trump. And I don't mean to even make him the boogeyman. It's just the first thing that comes to mind right now. Right. So he probably on a personal value system, there may very well be some awareness there. And it doesn't mean that he and his wife, as Jim might say, don't have very different views and experiences in the same world. So developing some curiosity might help in that.
Yeah, Trisha, the thing what we talk about a lot is, living in the same world and having a really different experience. Like your brother must not know that the world you live in feels really different than the world he lives in. I don't know what he does, but I know what I do, and I know what I see other men like me do. Is like when I hear about, even Mo as a white woman, when I hear about the passive aggressive or the microaggressive actions that she experiences, a lot of times my first reaction for the longest time was, oh no, you're just being sensitive, or oh no, that didn't really happen. And I'm wondering if that happens with your brother. If he says, yeah, you're making too big a deal out of it or something. But at some level, if he could just understand that the world's different for you than it is for him. And I don't know how he shows up different. He looks different. He's got white skin. It's a little hard to understand. I can see why it might be difficult for you. And, without you necessarily having to do all the work for him about telling him how the world is different, I wonder what he could do to discover how different the world is for others as well. And, of course, the other thing we always think about, well, who are the white men around him that understand what's happening and who see it? Because that's who he's going to hear more than anything, even probably than his sister, is another white guy saying, hey, man, this world's not the same for both of us, but for both of you. Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking, Jim, about what you were saying, and I was going to offer an example. It's not the same as race, but I think it's similar around gender that you and I actually personally encountered, which was that for a brief period of time, you and I were business partners. And I can remember in that role, we had a few interactions where long-term clients of mine, when we would be in a room together, they began deferring to you and tuning into you very differently than they were to me. And I found myself cut out. And I tried to tell you that story, as you may remember, and you were very much in your, I think in your male privilege, saying, Mo, that's not true. Like they're not tuning into me more. They still value and respect you. And me trying to tell you that, like, that wasn't my experience.
Right.
And, these guys used to treat me as a trusted advisor, and now they're asking me to go get them more wine, like, cause you're in the room. And so one of the gifts you gave me, and it took us a while, we had to like hammer at it. But I think where I got more effective with you was saying, darling, I want to tell you what this is like for me, because this isn't just about you and me. This is about ever since I was 17, when I've been in a professional setting next to a white guy like you, I have been asked to sit behind. And I was in the front row seat with these guys, and now because you're here, they're putting me behind. And when I really told you that story, and got open in my heart about what that felt like, which, by the way, let me just say, was not fun because I don't like being vulnerable.
No, you had to do it. You had to do it for like 6 months before I caught, or maybe even longer before I kind of caught on. I'm slow, man.
Well, but I think it's hard. But I think the part I was trying to share with Trisha that I remember from that moment was like, you didn't get it until I opened my heart and actually told you what it felt like, and caught your attention long enough for you to really hear it. And then I remember you were like, oh, like
Right.
that's what that feels like, to think that you're a trusted advisor, and then because someone's there, to have that shift. So I think that's that vulnerability, that authenticity, and then that willingness to keep going back at it.
Yeah. Trisha said that's exactly what he says. So it's like the incredulity, like, oh, you just gotta get tougher. Don't take it so personally. I can, Trisha, here's the hope for you is I used to say that all the time. I probably still say that sometimes, at different times, because I don't understand the disadvantage that others might feel in the world that I'm not aware of. Yeah.
And the challenge too is that if there are children involved, then often those types of things come up too in the child rearing choices. So he might not be aware, but the circle of friends might not be a diverse circle of friends that children are exposed to, and they might be internalizing message. And I'm saying if there's children, so I'm talking beyond even this couple, just on a larger level, right? That you want to have friends that also bring in those diverse perspectives, because the children, back to Mo's talk about emotional reaffirmations and feelings, are going to see that play out or not play out and have questions about that come up later on.
Yeah, good point.
Well, yeah, and I think you guys are both speaking to something else that is hard, I'm sure, for you, Trisha, but I know it's hard for me sometimes, is that my own incredulity that somebody sees something this way. Like Jim, going back to my example, which was around gender, I was incredulous that you didn't get this. I was like, okay, blockhead, like, you must be so thick because you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Like, I'm actually swimming in the Atlantic Ocean and you are in a tiny, tiny, tiny baby pool. And you don't understand because there's sharks eating me here and you are not getting it. And so I think that's like the incredulity and the judgment, which actually made me a bit difficult in our conversations, because I was like basically trying to shame you and make you feel small. And that didn't help. I had to tell you my story and what it was like to be me with an open heart. And then you began to get it over time. There's some more good questions. So I don't want to miss them. So hang on. It was back up a bit. Okay, so May wants to know, what have Jim and Noah changed their minds about lately in terms of things they used to believe? And have any of your major beliefs been shaken lately?
Oh, yes and yes. Let's see. Major things have changed. Major beliefs shaken. I'm going to start with that one. A major belief shaken since the murder of George Floyd has been, and not stopping there. I love that, for instance, Jim brought in Breonna Taylor. Yes, we need to look at historical patterns of Black men dying at the hands of law enforcement, and yes, Black women, Black trans, Black other expressions of Blackness too. So I really appreciate Jim bringing that name in. Nonetheless, you're going to let me, Jim. I just went on the soapbox and I forgot what the damn question was.
Have you changed your mind lately, or what was the other one? Or changed your beliefs?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Back to the idea of what's in it for white men. Certainly my I don't have a lot of intergenerational partnerships, period, with white men to begin with. Jim, my dad, I can't, a couple guys I work with, but I don't have a lot of that. So, I think Jim really in helping me figure out how, when I'm talking with other white men who aren't married to a Black woman, who haven't been on a racial equity journey for 25 or 30 years and are still committed to it, how to bring that rawness, which has always been my challenge with connecting to white men, how to bring that poetry into it without burning somebody with my own passion. So that's, rethinking tactics. It helps, and it's something and then on the long and connecting that to an emotional understanding of myself and others. And then it's something I changed my mind about connected to that is I'm going to vote for Biden. I didn't want to be I didn't want another moderate Democrat, to be totally honest. I didn't think that was going to advance our systems, and I still don't necessarily, but I am willing to understand eyes on the prize, in a way that I haven't always, in conjunction with doing the work I'm going to do about this anyway. So finding out how to move together with common alignment with people, hold on to some principles. It's a hard journey.
Thank you.
May, I'm changing my mind on something that I have this interesting practice. Mo's watching me do it with a couple of folks on Facebook. I'll put some provocative, I don't even think it's provocative, just some advocacy-based post around Black Lives Matter or police violence or social justice on Facebook. And I always get the naysayer comments because I have friends and colleagues and clients that, I see on Facebook. And I got this new practice. I used to kind of like use those opportunities to show how smart I was, to show them how wrong they were in their opinions, and to try and roll out the data to kind of, and that was probably much more driven from my insecurity and my desire to be right than the desire to create relationship. But I've actually changed my mind in that I've noticed in some of my exchanges, if I just hang in there and don't respond to the insults and don't come from a posture of knowing better or treating them as less, right? So it's the same thing. It's like there's, kind of some sort of morally or intellectually superior stance. Of course, it's going to create more distance and closeness. I've actually realized that, this whole thing about if you're talking to somebody who feels like your enemy, keep talking.
That's right.
And keep listening. Not just keep talking, but keep listening. And eventually, what I notice in all that, the thing I'm changing my mind about is it actually works. Patience works. Right. Slowing down works. And just saying, tell me about this. And not just around race and difference, but for sure around race and difference, but also just in my relationship with my significant other and with my work colleagues. It's like to slow the heck down and say, wow, this is different than I thought. Tell me more. And sit in the fire with it versus feeling like I've got to, argue with it. Because eventually I get to be heard too. And that's one of my big fears is I'm not going to be heard. So I better say what I think. I better get my 2 cents in quick. And that's just not necessary. The world doesn't evolve that way. And so I'm learning that. I'm changing my mind about that. I'm changing my mind about how good virtual works. It works really well. Yeah. And my beliefs that have been shaken is I'm like probably a lot of people, I'm really questioning my confidence in our systems of governance. I can't believe we are where we are. I can't believe we're not standing up for what's right in legislative at the top. It concerns me. So that's not supposed to get political probably, but there it is.
That's right. We're not. But it's hard not to, right? Because it's impacting our world all over. And I'm struck with what you're both saying around, the things that are surprising you and the power of curiosity, of like really, really trying to slow down what we know and be really, really deeply listening. And it strikes me about, and something I see you both model in your lives, but I also think that it's important for our viewers, to think about is this idea that this work around knowing better and doing better starts with changing our mindset, like actually changing how we see the world. And I'm always struck with this metaphor of, how when you buy a new car and, you get that car and you're like, I'm driving a blue Kia Niro. And then next thing you know, everybody's driving a Kia Niro. You're like, there's so many blue Kia Niros, like to me, that's how this work can be when we're really curious. And then to say, okay, what is up with all these blue Kia Niros? Like to me, that's the curiosity of now that I've had some insight, like what is up with what's happening to Black people and what's been happening to them 100 years ago, what's happening to them today in my business, in my community. And then instead of being like, no, that can't be true, being like, okay, I'm going to assume it's true because someone told me that it's true for them. Now, what else do I need to know? How can I be curious about that? What's that like? Where does that come from? How can I help? What's my role? And that mindset shift is where it has to start, right? But I think a lot of white guys and a lot of white women too, we want to start with doing something.
Right.
That mindset shift is doing something. I bet that the reason you and Jim were able to hang in there for 6 months as you were helping Jim understand your experience
It's longer than 6 months. I'm telling you, Noah.
It's because you were invested in your marriage. And see, the thing is back to your colleague, our colleague Cherie's point about Blue Google, the Black Google. my understanding when I interact with people of color is not that they don't want to be in conversation with me,
No,
and not
not
that
at
they
all.
want their voice removed from it, but it's what you said. Hey, man, when you're taking some of the basic steps in here, like I used that late to class analogy earlier, you don't really come in and tell the teacher, F you, I'm not going to take a note and throw, well, I did that. And let me tell you, I got kicked out of high school, so it didn't work. So you're right. You're going to come in with that little bit of a humility and curiosity. So if you do some of that work, especially like you said, particularly from the mindset of, and I'm going to challenge myself to actually believe people's stories and experiences, no matter what my underlying chatter says, even if I'm still kind of my old mindset and kind of in a new place as I begin to interact with others, they're going to see me working and see my earnest and my authenticity. And that already is going to be a different place marker in the conversation. So to me, that actually is
Right.
something.
I love that.
Cool.
Were you going to say something too, Jim?
No, I was going to say, yeah, it wasn't 6 months. No, you're right. It was like 12 years, but yeah.
Maybe you just got it now, right, darling? Well, I love that. I love what you said, no, about like, changing your mindset is doing something. And I think that, internal work is invisible to others. And I know I know we have some diversity on this call with us. And I know that people will watch this that are not only white, but I am aware that, you are two white guys and that I am a white woman. And I feel like it's really important to be honest with the fact that, with that you just said, Noah, which is that changing our mindset is doing something because it's how we drive behavior. Right. And I'm noticing, talking to you two, as I noticed when I talked to Susan, the richness and the value in talking with insaneness as difference. And I think that we don't have to other someone to say, like, for example, my sister has two disabled sons. I don't have to talk to my nephews in order to get a better sense of what it's like to be disabled. I can talk to my able-bodied athletic friends and be like, let's think about this for a minute. What would it be like if we wanted to go to Top Mount Bachelor and we didn't have legs? Mm-hmm. What would that be like? And we can actually do that for each other, like you two do for me. And I just really believe in the value of that work, as well as reaching across and having the dialogues across difference. So one of the things, because we're going to run out of time, but for those of you that are watching, we had promised a 30-day plan coming out of this last Know Better Do Hour, and we don't have it finished yet. Partly because we didn't want to just focus on action, because then we get into the do loop, which is not that good for anybody, right? Of what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And then really not actually getting at root mindset. But also because I want to turn to all of the panelists that have come up into Know Better, Do Better, and co-create kind of like a 30-day plan that says, from these 5 experts, like, here's some things we think of that you can do in the next 30 days to continue to change your mindset. I saw a post on social today about how the George Floyd memory and the racial uprising is starting to fade, right? Mm. Companies aren't scrambling as much to make sure that they have something on their mission statement. And that's anxiety producing. And this is a long tail game. And so I'd love this 30-day plan when we release it to be, a really beautiful, visually recorded, probably by my colleague May Ratz, kind of document that allows people to take this into a longer time frame. It took us 400 years to get here on race and gender discrimination and hetero discrimination, et cetera. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take us a while. And we don't get tired and exit.
That's right.
So that's where we're headed with that. But as we leave our viewers here, what would you two like to say to kind of close out this conversation of your own work in this realm?
I'll go. I just really appreciate having a chance to talk with you about this, Mo, and I love the questions that people asked and the feedback in the chat. And also I just really I love the model for these sessions around, what is it? It's learn. What are they? It's
learn, feel, know, do.
Learn, feel, know, do. And I'm one of those people that goes do, learn, do, learn, do, learn, do, learn, do, learn. And like you said, in this case, doing for us is sometimes just slowing down and talking about it. And I've learned so much from you and from Noah, actually, about opening my heart and realizing there's a world available to me that I didn't know that was available to me by just, actually, it's kind of the whole idea, like, if you if you have a two-way door, you're going to let you're going to let you got to be willing to let some feelings come in that sometimes are not so good. If you're going to open your heart, sometimes your heart's going to get hurt. And if you open your heart, sometimes your heart's going to get healed. And these kind of conversations and being with you and Noah and things like this is just really powerful for me. So thank you.
Yeah. And I would almost just end it on that, because that's a beautiful sentiment. And I'm going to add, a piece of it too that is around looking at. We talked earlier about what might prevent us as white people sometimes from doing this work, and the fact of getting it wrong, or the shame or these other things that we might mess up along the way. And I would just invite, and I heard somebody say this recently, so I'm going to take it from them, the idea of to look at it like a slingshot, and anytime we're advancing on our path of inclusion, anytime we get pulled back for a minute, it really is the universe preparing to excel you ahead if you're willing to do that work on your mindset that we just talked about. I do believe that, which connects to my last thought, abundancy. Sometimes there's an association in some of my experience with whiteness of scarcity mindset, and it can lead me to acting tribalistic with other white people, and certainly with people unconsciously of color, as far as just securing mine and making sure I'm okay. And I really want to invite my heart and head past that. I know it's going to take it the next level of that for us to go ahead as an organization and as a planet. So really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Noah. And I think that's so well said. And the last closing thought I would add, because it did come up on the other sessions that we had, is that, the implication sometimes from Know Better, Do Better has been like that only white people have work to do. And what I really appreciated that Tanya and Cherie really brought into them was they're like, heck no, like we Black, Indigenous, and brown people got work to do too. We got to do work on our anger. We got to do work on our forgiveness. We got to do work on our learning and what we don't know about whiteness. And, and I really appreciated those voices too. It's like we're all to be in this all for all work around inclusion and creating real cultures of belonging. We all need to be in the work together. And so thank you both for being willing to jump into some of the work and taking an hour of your precious time with me. And thank you to everybody who came and watched. We couldn't really have anywhere near as enlivened a conversation if you weren't willing to take your time to join us. And until next time, everybody, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mo.
Take care. We'll put the recording up. Bye, guys.
Bye.